And then there were four. The semifinals of the Winter 24 season in Rhode Island are set. We're going to talk about who got there, and then we're going to preview those matchups, those two semifinal matchups. And I'm going to put the guys on the spot to make some picks. And we're also going to break down what happened in the quarterfinals in our first night of the playoffs here. Their kind of first experience of the playoffs and how some things change, how some things are different, how some strategies change, and really, the top four seeds are the ones to advance. And I think, before we kind of get into the games in our post-game show here, we have Wyatt and Chris standing by. I think it is the four teams that were the best this regular season, so I'm kind of happy with that, and I'll get some head nods, I'm sure, from the guys. We'll talk about that in a second. The Owlwaves made a strong case towards the end of the year for kind of being in that conversation of one of the four best teams that, should advance to the semifinals. That's what happens in the 4-5 matchup. You get a team kind of even with you right away in the playoffs. But I think the four teams we have were the four best over the course of the season. I mean, the Regulators, went on a run there. The Road Dogs were in the conversation for best team, and the Halfway Crooks and Lob City battled that out all year, as those four teams will play in the semis. Let's start with the quarterfinals. We'll start at 8 o'clock because those were some of the closer matchups. And we'll start with Road Dogs and Owlwaves. And I know Wyatt was on court one, so we'll get to him. And it is the Road Dogs able to pull it out, the 4 seed. So like we talked about, one of those teams that was in it all year, and then they end up losing a couple down the stretch and are the 4 seed. So we'll just get to it right away. They'll take on Lob City in the first of our 2 semifinal matchups, and that's going to be an awesome game. But they did have to take care of the Owlwaves first. They did 79-68. I just, went back and kind of rewatched this game more closely. It was a game of runs, Wyatt, and really the Owlwaves had a couple chances with the ball down 4 in the second half, and we're never really able to get that bucket to kind of make it a single possession game. Then the Road Dogs kind of blew it back open, so to speak, by 10. I mean, it was never a really wide margin. But before we kind of get into the stats, Wyatt, what'd you see from the Road Dogs and kind of them getting back to what made them successful all year?
So, like you said, it was a game of runs. It was a very streaky game all around. But the Road Dogs have a very good defense, and they expressed it. I talked to Anthony Lyons after the game, and he was talking about how impressive their defense is, and I agree with him. And that's the one thing, like matching up against Lob City, that's going to be really crucial because Lob City's an elite offense, obviously. I mean, this game they racked up 10 steals, which is pretty crazy. And Mark Washington put up 31. He had a great game, and Rion Watts also had a great game, putting up 27 as well. But yeah, I think they played well. The All Waves almost got it, but they just couldn't pull it through. Yeah.
You talk about Lob City, they went for 153, and there was some interesting circumstances in their quarterfinal game, but still 150 points for a team is a lot. So that offense versus the Road Dogs defense is something we'll preview, and you guys are going to be put on the spot to kind of give me one word for each of those matchups. So start thinking about kind of one word to describe the 2 semifinal matchups. But like Wyatt said, Mark Washington, 31 points, 5 threes, 5 of 12 from 3. Rion Watts, really, he does everything for that team, and that's not a knock, or it really is a compliment. I mean, he's able to score. We talked about 27 points, 13 of 17, and sure, he attacks a lot, so you expect him to make most of the shots he takes, but it's some jumpers, it's some threes. I mean, he's kind of doing a little bit of everything. It's his defense, 6 steals, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists for Rion Watts. I mean, a near quadruple double is strong because sure, he had, what did I say, 5 assists and 6 steals. So he still had some work to do, but really was doing everything: steals, assists, rebounds. And he's been one of the team's most important rebounders, even though he kind of is their lead guard, and a little smaller than the other players on his team. Mark Washington, I think his defense actually doesn't get enough love. And again, I don't want to preview too much, but he fouled out with 7 minutes to go the last time that the Road Dogs played Lob City, right? And I think he's one of their bigger players, one of their better defenders. Not having him down the stretch helped, right? Lob City doesn't mean they would have won. That's not what I'm saying. And it's going to be an awesome game to preview and an awesome game to watch on Tuesday night. But he's a huge part, and he was a huge part here as well. Jalen Ardrey, 10 points, and he kind of was hitting some jumpers, and we can name the whole team. But for Owlwaves, Josh DePina closed it out strong, and he messaged me. He wishes he was at full strength, and I'm sure, we all do. He had a really good year. 21 points for him, 4 threes. Terrence Gallo came on strong. He's always attacking. He's so quick, and it's hard to stay in front of him for sure. He was showing that. 10 rebounds and 18 points for him. And Andrew Valley, 3 more threes. I think Wyatt, let's touch on this really quick because it was one of the closer matchups. They talked about how important Nick Montanino was going to be in this matchup against the Road Dogs, where he wasn't there the first time these two teams played. He finished with 8 points, 4 of 10 shooting, 7 rebounds. Not a bad game, but it wasn't the game I'm sure they were hoping for. What I want to say is you kind of didn't notice him out there, but that's not fair. That's the wrong way to put it. I guess maybe what I mean is he wasn't impacting the game as much as we expected, or enough for the All Waves to kind of overcome and pull out the win. What do you kind of think about that matchup? Where what did the Road Dogs do against him, one of the All Waves most important players?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the Road Dogs have a great defense, but he just didn't seem as aggressive tonight. I don't know if it was because of the defense or because of how their team wanted to play it. Maybe they were trying to stretch the floor more, but I don't know. That it seemed a little off because usually he dominates the paint, but it seemed like the Road Dogs, they were just stripping the ball. They were doing everything to stop him. I mean, he wasn't trying to push the paint as much as he usually does. He usually pushes the pace and like put back dunks, everything. But he wasn't able to get that going tonight. And I think that was because he wasn't able to get those second chance buckets like he usually does.
Great points. I think that's an off game is what I was getting at earlier from him. And we talked about it. They needed him to be on it, on his A game to win, and they kept the game close even without that, but they needed more from him, I think is fair. And I'm sure he would agree. Let's get over to court 2 at 8 o'clock. The other first and closest actually matchup. I have the final score here because we're still working on the stats from that one, but Regulators 58, Air Mambas 51 in our 3-6. So it is the Regulators advancing to take on the Halfway Crooks. We'll talk about how the Halfway Crooks and Lob City got there, but we've already kind of mentioned the matchups. It'll be Road Dogs and Lob City in the 1-4, and the Regulators advancing to take on the Halfway Crooks in the 2-3 matchup in our second semifinal matchup on Tuesday. But Chris, the Regulators, I mean, again, we're not going to go too stat heavy, but I know you were there and you've already seen the full game. So, even about the flow, I mean, I know it was 12-3 first quarter. So kind of the Regulators got out early and then really kind of held the Air Mambas off in a game that they played just a week ago. Right. And I talked about that a lot last week, where it's like, all right, what adjustments were made? So what do you think they were able to adjust, if anything? And what did the Regulators do, Chris, in this one?
Think last week the Regulators got killed a lot by Luis specifically because the Regulators, they're a very like good, like well-rounded team, but they don't have a lot of big guys like in the paint other than maybe like 1 or 2 people. So I think last week what happened, the reason that the game was so close was because they weren't able to defend the paint as well. I think today they did a better job on not only defending the paint, but they did also a good job of defending the perimeter because they had the Air Mambas obviously in a lot of trouble for most of the game. Like the first quarter was a filling out process for kind of both teams with being like so low scoring, but after that, both teams kind of found their groove after that.
And you talked about it. So 12-3 after the first quarter. And if I'm doing my math, that means it was a double-digit lead at halftime, 20, 31, 17. And then really, the Regulators kept it up, and the Air Mambas tried coming back in that fourth quarter. I did see some of that, and they made a run of 21-8 fourth quarter. So, credit to them, and they got it to single digits and were kind of putting the pressure on, but the Regulators able to hold them off. Justin Titsworth, 3 made 3s. Tommy McSparren, another good game, 12 points, and really, a low scoring game, but the Regulators get it done. And then as for the Air Mambas, a big season. You talked about Luis Ramirez. We talked about Mario Valerio, him coming back after being injured last week and not being able to finish that game. So, a good season from them and the Regulators. And, I think kind of why I'm going to move on here, partially because some of the stats that we're still working on them, but it wasn't as close of a game as that score indicates. Like I said, a big fourth quarter when, the Air Mambas were down and really allowed, the Regulators to finish them off and advance. So let's kind of keep it with Chris, and we'll throw him right back into this as Lob City's able to get the win in that second game on court 2. a big score from them. I know I said, what did I say before? 153 to 80, and I'm doing that off of memory. Yeah, 153 to 80 for Lob City, the unaffiliated team only with 3 players. So again, I'm sure that helped on why it was such a large margin. But Lob City taking care of business and they advanced. So Chris, we can do one kind of topic on this one. But aside from the crazy stats I already know from Joe Secator and I think, Joey Niederberger had 44 for unaffiliated. So shout out to him. I know playing the whole game, and Lob City only with 5 guys. So Joe Secator, 55, Colin Burns with 33, Cody Crawford with 32. That's how you get so many points, right? But you can kind of take us into that preview process as well with Lob City, but back to, as full of strength as they can be and back to championship form to kick off the playoffs.
Yeah, I think Lob City obviously is just one of the better teams at getting rebounds and like pushing the ball in transition. Obviously, we know what the circumstances were, but they just do that extremely well. Because even though they're like one of the bigger teams, it's just crazy how even like the guys that they have are so fast. Like Nuri's so fast, and Colin, like those guys are just insane. Like by the time the ball even comes off the rim, they're already on the other side of the court. So I think, like we said, with like the Road Dogs being also one of the other taller teams, we'll definitely be able to see, like we saw last time, it was probably one of the more lower scoring games, and teams had to earn the points that they were having, and a lot of guys were being fouled. So I think we're going to kind of see the same thing again. We won't see Lob City against the Road Dogs probably get as many like fast break points, but it'll still be a physical game, which will be fun to see.
Yeah, we can expect some of those fast break points that they had in the quarterfinals to not be there in the semifinals. And I think that's going to be one of those things that we look for as a repeat from when they met in the regular season. A 51-39 game. We'll go more in depth on those stats when the Road Dogs and Lob City played and how it was a slower pace already. Now let's add in a second matchup where the teams kind of are a little more familiar with each other, and it's the playoffs. And I talk about it all the time. Things slow down in the playoffs just because of the what's at stake, right? And it being better teams facing off against each other, and it is what it is. It slows down in the playoffs, which makes it a lot more fun and a lot more entertaining. That's for sure. We'll preview that matchup. Good job on that one. Shout out to Unaffiliated. They were in a lot of games, and they've said it themselves. Not getting a win this season, but able to be competitive with a lot of the teams in the league and just kind of on the wrong end of a lot of their games. Let's keep it moving. Wyatt, the halfway crooks, made it interesting over there. You had two fun games on court one, that's for sure. It is the halfway crooks advancing 65-57, so another low scoring game. And I lived this game. I already watched it back on our live stream this morning, so double pain in the past 24 hours from me, and it was a 17-7 first quarter lead for the Gym Rats, and so a lot of things going their way. They were making shots, they were making the right plays, and then the halfway crooks before the end of the first quarter cut it to 17-14, took the lead at the half, kind of flipped it in the second quarter, and then were able to keep that lead. And it went back and forth a little bit there in that third quarter, but then when they got the lead in the fourth, were able to pull away. So, Wyatt, in addition to some of the stats there, but what happened? And we'll save some of the previewing because shout out to the Gym Rats. And I said it when I talked to you after the game, not to steal your thunder. I know it's, a good, probably your best post-game interview of the year, right? I mean, you had me, but I said it, the Gym Rats, shout out to them playing much better as the season has gone on. And, hitting shots, taking advantage of stuff down low. Brandon Whitman was back. I mean, what else was going well for them in this one?
I mean, yeah, they looked pretty good in this game. I mean, they came out strong. They embraced that underdog mentality and came out at the gates. And no one expected it. I didn't expect it. I mean, one thing I would like to see more from them was efficient shooting. They shot 3 for 26 from 3. I mean, in a big game, that can't happen. If they hit those threes, who knows? That may be a different outcome here. I mean, like you said yesterday, you didn't have Charles Alexander, so that was a big key piece of why the game was closer. I mean, but the Gym Rats look good. I wish they didn't get eliminated so early because I would have liked to see what they would have done. Because like Thomas DeAndre, he just looked a little off that game, shooting 30%. He's usually their key guy, getting rebounds and putting up those easy second chance points. But the Crooks put a stop to that, and They played great defense because they held their best scorers to low shooting percentages throughout. And yeah,
As for the stats, Ethan Austin with 35, and he played well. 4 of 6 from three, was hitting some threes, was getting rebounds. Devin Devampina with 13. You talked about, I talked about Brandon Whitman coming back, 17 points, 8 rebounds, and it's crazy that I didn't even realize this. And I did these stats 2 hours ago, so they're pretty darn accurate. 3 of 26 isn't what it felt like living it. That is what they shot from three. And so we talked about, and I talked about it in the past couple weeks. If you're going to pull off an upset, you're going to have to make some threes to kind of even some stuff out. So that's exactly right. I agree with that. 38-24 advantage for the Gym Rats on the rebounding stats and 16 offensive rebounds. So that's kind of how they were able to make up and take advantage. It's crazy with no Charles Alexander, like you talked about. I think that's a notable point. They weren't able to get anybody really in foul trouble. And Thomas DeAndrea, taking 7 threes, whenever their biggest player is out there, we're like, shoot it. Awesome. Because it's going to be harder for him to get a rebound. And credit to him, he does crash after he shoots actually pretty well and does get kind of down there to mix it up. But if he's out on the 3-point line shooting, he's not able to kind of get as many offensive rebounds. And so I think a little bit that, again, they jumped out early and kind of kept doing what they did early, but a lot of that wasn't attacking, I think, some of the advantages that they had with only real one big guy for the halfway crooks and Devin Devampina. And so, ideally getting him in some foul trouble, not that there's anyone to come in for him. He would have just played till he fouled out, essentially. But, then in the fourth quarter, if you can get him out, or get some guys in foul trouble and kind of take even more advantage down low. I think that was their thing. But let's spin it. Let's go back to Lob City Road Dogs. We'll kind of keep just rotating and make this a whole mishmash of a show. But let's kind of move into those semifinals. The first one at 8 o'clock will be the 4th-seeded Road Dogs and the top-seeded Lob City, refacing off from a week 8 matchup. So not the last game of the regular season, the second to last game, because we had our makeup week, but 51-39 Lob City, and a 20-8 fourth quarter. So it was tied going into the fourth quarter based on my great math skills. And we talked about, Mark Washington fouling out. So let's get Chris back in here. He hasn't talked too much about because Road Dogs was on the other court. So what do you think, Chris? I'm going to make you make a pick kind of at the end of your analysis, but let's pick a word if you can. It can be hyphenated, whatever. You don't have to actually stick to this, but like, what's a word and what's something in this matchup as these teams face off again that you're focusing on as the key for who's going to advance to the finals?
I think for both teams, but more specifically for the Road Dogs, if they want a chance to win, it would be efficiency. Because I remember looking at the stats all year, they probably play some of the best defense of any team because they're probably the tallest team out of any team, other than maybe Lob City, but they're probably similar. But we know the Road Dogs don't take as many threes and they don't take as many shots as other teams do. Like they're not putting up as many points as other teams are. So I know if they want, the same thing's gonna have to happen again if they want to keep the game close. They're gonna have to keep it a low scoring game, and they're gonna have to take efficient shots on their own side of the court and probably space the floor out as much as they can and probably just try and move the ball around as much as possible. Because we know they don't take a lot of threes and they take mainly elbow jumpers and stuff like that. So I expect to see the same thing again from them, and they're gonna have to try and do the same thing for Lob City. But if I had to pick one, I'm gonna go Road Dogs. I think Road Dogs could pull it out. I think if they can keep it close like they did last time and make some of the guys work for the shots more, and maybe they can try and rattle a couple guys on the Lob City more. And then it'll be interesting to see if the game can stay as close as it was last time, and see if Mark can stay in the game. But I think Road Dogs can do it.
It's close, and I don't like to give Lob City, I always say it's a different beast in the playoffs, and we will see them play different in the playoffs, that's for sure. I don't like to give them any motivation. So there you go, Chris. You're giving Lob City that an underdog kind of by picking the Road Dogs. Let me just say the Road Dogs this past week on that point of 3-pointers, they shot 7 of 23 from 3. And if we go back to when these teams played, so a couple weeks ago, the Road Dogs were 6 for 33. So they took a lot more threes against Lob City when they last played than they did against other teams, I think is fair to say. And that could be because of how even size-wise these teams kind of appear when they play, right? And so there's not as much of an advantage for the Road Dogs down low against Lob City as it would be when they play other teams. And so not that they settled, but again, they made more threes this past week, taking 10 less, right? They made so that needs to change. If they're going to take 30 plus threes again, they have to make more than 6 of them, and I think that would help for them. And as for Lob City, they've been in these games. They went themselves 3 of 21 the last time these two teams played from 3, and only had the 4 guys. So I'm sure that they will have some of their bench there. George Carley, Jordan Grace, Rayvon Dunbar. I mean, all of those guys have played roles in games this season where they can be very helpful in a game like this and kind of defending and going at the Road Dogs. All right, enough from me. Wyatt, your turn. So kind of what's your key and who you got?
I got to go with Lob City on this one because Lob City is just dominant. And I talked to Colin Burns, I think about 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about how they are so dominant in the playoffs because everyone shows up on their team. Everyone will come out there and do their role, and they'll play well. They have that chemistry. That's why they win so much, and that's why they look so dominant. I mean, the one thing I will say here is if the Road Dogs are able to get their 3-point shooting going, they actually have a very good shot of winning this game because I remember earlier in the season, they had a game where they hit 19 threes. And in that game, I actually was thinking that they might be the best team in the league because that shooting will kill any team. And but I don't know though, because if Joseph Secator and Colin Burns get going, who's stopping them either? So I think it's gonna be a close one, and I'm gonna give the edge to Lob City here.
I'm very excited to watch it. Let's put it. I'm happy that we get a little rematch, especially after just how intense that game was. Yeah, and point to that about making threes. I mean, let's preface this entire conversation with if any team, how many did they make? Would you say 30 threes? No, they didn't. No way. How many? 13? Okay, 19. I was gonna say 30 is a lot, but if any team makes 19 in a game, they should look pretty good, right? And so I mean, the Road Dogs are a good team, but if any team is gonna make that many, yeah, they're going to be much more difficult to beat, right? Last time these two teams played, Jalen Ardrey 1 of 7 from 3, so he came on, this past week. I think was very helpful for them on offense, making some shots. If he can make a few more, I think he's kind of one of those players that can help, Rion Watts and Mark Washington kind of be that third option that the Road Dogs will need to play well. Yeah, one pick from each. I don't pick, which is great. So there's no tie break here. I would go Lob City. So there you go. I made a pick after I said I wouldn't. You can't go against the champs. And it's so funny. A couple seasons ago, I enjoyed, like I said, there was a season where Lob City lost 3 or 4 games in the regular season. They still went on to win the title. But in those playoffs, we were doing this exact same thing. We're like, I don't know. I know they've won a lot of games, but, they did lose a few this season and they're vulnerable. And I was like, no. It's different, and it really is a different season, right? For all the teams, really what happened before doesn't necessarily matter, and it will be about how both teams adjust now that they're playing for a second time. So very excited for that one. Let's get into the other semifinal at 9 o'clock. The second seeded Halfway Crooks and the third seeded Regulators. Seeds don't really matter either. There's no home court advantage, but the Crooks and Regulators play again for the first time since week 1. And in week 1, it was a 1-point win for the Halfway Crooks, a close game throughout. Notably, it was the same core 5 in that game that we saw in the quarterfinals for the Halfway Crooks. No Charles Alexander. So far, I've heard he'll be there next week. That's what I got so far from some inside information from some people who might know, on the Halfway Crooks. But so that'll be something that's different, right, for the Regulators to kind of adjust to. And he is a second bigger player that kind of could disrupt some things for the Regulators, right? And so I think having him is important for the Halfway Crooks and for the Regulators. Not that, we'll see who you guys pick, but I'm sure the Regulators would agree. They shot 6 of 17 from 3, and it was really only Justin Titsworth making threes. It'd be nice to kind of have some other players hit some threes in this game for them. And mainly Tommy McSparran, I think, is their real only other, shooter. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, to, kind of even some of that out, some of that size disparity that I think is fair to say. But regulators are a good team. They've won a 5 of their last 6, something like that. They've won a good amount most recently. So we'll go reverse order. Let's go Wyatt first. Kind of your key and who you got in this one.
I mean, I got to go with the halfway crooks. I like the regulators, but I feel like they're a team that sometimes doesn't put it all together. But the halfway crooks are more consistent, even though sometimes they are streaky. Their 2 games against Lob City, I thought they were a little streaky. They had the leads at points and they give it away. But I think the halfway crooks got it, especially if Alexander's there, because he's a dominant force and not many people can contest his shots in the paint. He'll just dunk on you every play. And yeah, so if the halfway crooks can get everything going, their 3-pointers going, if they just get that paint game going as well, I think they have a really good shot.
And let me just shout out before we get to Chris, Joey Cordero. How could I forget? I mean, a good shooter for the regulators that has come on and been playing better to kind of hit some shots, for the regulators. So, all right, one for the halfway crooks. Chris, who you got?
I'm gonna go with the underdog. I'm gonna go with the regulators. I like to, keep it keep it kind of why would they win? Let's see. 3-point shooting, like we talked about. Obviously, if Charles is there, it's gonna be a tall hill to try and overcome, but the regulators, in order for the regulators to have a chance of winning, which I think they could. I think if like Tommy and Justin and obviously we talked about Joey, I think if they can space the floor out, obviously they have a couple other guys that are pretty good. They space the floor out as much as you can, and obviously they're gonna need a lot of threes to go down. But if they can start going, they can definitely keep it interesting, keep it close. But I think the regulators could do it.
All right, I was gonna say your start of your analysis wasn't as strong. It wasn't very convincing, but you finished strong. Yeah, and I think that it's I mean, something to watch in real time will be the rebounding, right? And so forget the size for a second. Sure, that matters, but if the regulators can get some offensive rebounds on some long shots, right, where the size, they can hustle it down and take advantage that way. Keeping the rebounding as close as they can will keep them in a game. And sure, we talk about that a lot. It goes for almost any team. It's helpful to kind of be in the game on the boards, especially for them to get those second chance points, to attack the rim. Doug Whedon, a couple times a game will get to the rim and get some big plays for them that kind of gets them going. So shout out to him as well. Yeah, I mean, so we have a couple different matchups here. So it will be Tuesday, the 19th will be our semifinals. Again, Lob City Road Dogs and then Halfway Crooks and the regulators, both games live on our YouTube. So stay tuned for that starting at 8 o'clock. And then the Halfway Crooks will tip shortly after 9, once the first game wraps up. But they'll be following each other on Tuesday night. So a good game of hoops. I'm sure these guys will be there. We'll see who wins, and then we'll be back to preview the finals. So whichever teams win, we'll play on the 26th. And we'll have a full show for that. Next week, we'll break down the semifinals and we will preview the finals. We're going to have some end of season awards as well based on the regular season, but 4 teams left in the winter 24 season in Rhode Island. We'll see who wins. We have to kind of, keep in mind who picked who here so I can, make fun of whoever was wrong next week, especially if it's Chris because he didn't want to pick my team, and that's only fair to make fun of Chris when he chooses against the Halfway Crooks. Damn it, it's a sin to do that. But hey, some good games next week, guys. Good job, good analysis, and we'll see everyone on Tuesday for the semifinals. Thanks for watching the post-game show.